Love is a crime against extinction. I work with EcoCongregation Scotland, which is a bit of a mouthful, and my title there is Environmental Chaplain. And I've got permission to contract that to Eco-Chaplain. Emphasise the environmental dimension of mainstream Christianity. As we speak, there are 470 local congregations on our books. That covers a very wide spectrum of commitment and indeed of spiritualities. I suppose what I'm saying sometimes quite generally is if anybody's involved with any faith group whatsoever and there's no sign of concern for what we call creation, then go and ask why not. Because it's unlikely that any spiritual tradition will not have concern for and encouraging people to cherish and take care for the planet that you're part of. We have within eco-congregations people who can advise on photovoltaic cells, all the things that you're talking about that make your house more efficient. And part of that is that if you are moving yourself and others towards what I think you now conventionally see as a sustainable or more sustainable way of life, that is a loving act. That's an act of love to yourself, your neighbour and the planet. Love is a crime against extinction. Because bringing the bad news that we're hearing into a spiritual context does help people begin to not just panic, but process it a bit more in their lives. Churches and faith groups don't rule the world. If ever they start thinking they do, they're up barking up the wrong tree. What they do is provide a place for people to think through where they are, perhaps to encounter some of the really bad news that's happening. And the sustainability dimension there is how do you keep yourself going? How do you remain, let's say, hopeful through times which are not particularly hopeful? So let that carry on. And each small step you take will help you with that. Every bit of action, every bit of commitment that you make is helping you be sustained. And if you're sustained, you're sustaining the community. See yourself as the asset. If you yourself are committed to environmental action and sustainability as a lifestyle, you're doing the world a lot of good. And you need to find ways of keeping yourself going and encouraging others. Obviously, spiritual traditions have a lot to offer in that, but really spirituality is the only area of life where people do make changes. Because we can hear the facts, and you can even accept the facts, but then you're probably going to find an awful lot of excuses and ways to evade them. And like what I found. So faithfulness is using all your gifts, all your deviousness, all your intelligence to act lovingly. People like to be like the proverbial ostrich, and they say, yes, but, I'm doing my best, yes, but we've still got to keep on exploring for fossil fuels. And at some point you have to say, well, it's a loving thing to say, perhaps we don't have to. And how do you reach the point of not just being, as I said previously, not just being sort of harmless and nice and but also a bit more crafty, a bit more sneaky, and a bit more upfront and saying, wow, how are things really going to change? And are those actually excuses you're giving, or are they good reasons why you're not changing? Another thing that's been, I think, very much part of a spiritual approach is, well, it's something that's picked up by the government here, the idea of just transition. If there's change that the whole community has to embrace, how do you not make it fall just on a small group. At the moment around the world, by and large, the people who are suffering most directly and most immediately in the climate crisis are the people who cause it less. How do we challenge people to pick up that responsibility? And if it doesn't happen, where do you go from there? Things are beginning to bite, because you can't pull a rabbit out of the hat and say, we're going to just fix it. We need to find a way of living through difficult times. And if you're looking after yourself through that, if you're sustaining your own hope, if you're looking after other people, that's building community is about the most sustainable thing you can do. And you can add, obviously, you can look at that from a statistical point of view. If people live together and share things, they're using far less resources anyway. So at the moment, we've got our 470 congregations who've signed up. Some of them have, done all the stuff. Everything you were mentioning you can do to a building, and that what they're also doing is reaching out into their communities and realizing that if you are doing all the things that churches always used to have to do, like looking after people who haven't got food, you're actually cutting down your carbon footprint at the same time. Quite amazingly and wonderfully, doing the right thing actually ends up being doing the right thing environmentally as well. The food that would be thrown out and wasted gets to people who need it, and that cuts down the carbon footprint, which is of benefit if you're looking for grants and things, to community groups. What I think I also need to say is it is about relationship. I think when I started in my work as a minister, there were a lot of hymns and prayers around that talked about us having been given the planet, or the idea of stewardship as if you're looking after somebody else's property, or the world is a gift to us. But we live in a time when actually the idea of gift is something that's throwaway. Almost all the presents people get at Christmas will be in the bin by next Christmas. And if we think of things as gifts, there's that weakness. So what I'm trying to do most of the time is develop a relationship of people with the planet. There's an awful lot in Christianity about hearing the voice of the earth, that the stones will cry out if you don't yourself speak out for justice. That the whole creation is groaning, waiting for people to sit up and take notice and do what they're there to do. If there is anybody involved in a faith group at all, and they're not heavily involved in environmental things, really, why not? Because why else are they there? Technology from time to time helps. But again, technology bizarrely also follows vision. We need to be very careful that when we're talking about the end of fossil fuel vehicles and things like that, we also remember the increase in public health, in clean air, all that sort of stuff. The benefits that are there that we really haven't seen yet. That it doesn't all come over as dour and grim and, whipping yourself. I think it's important to be very, very well aware of how bad things are, but then say, where do we go from here? The small things are worthwhile because they change you, and that changes the world. So this sense of holiness and reverence and awe and love and cherishing is about as good a way of being committed as you can get, and whatever path you go on it. Obviously I've got my own path, but I am delighted to see and encouraged, and I thank God for it when I see other people expressing that love. Yeah.